Welcome, members, friends of the Camino Society of Ireland, and friends of the Camino. My name is Joe Maguire, and I'm a board member of the Camino Society. It's my privilege tonight to introduce you to two legends of the Camino. It's very appropriate that we have these gentlemen because of their Celtic connections. Naturally, being Irish, we're claiming ownership of them. They both have distinguished themselves because of their great knowledge of the Camino and because of the work that they've done to introduce the Camino to a worldwide audience. I'm talking, of course, of John Rafferty, otherwise known as Johnnie Walker, and John Brierley, author of the famous Brierley Guides. This event is really about them. I hope to hear some of their backstories, stories of their introduction to the Camino, how they caught the virus that we all caught, that makes them want to go back again and again and again. I really hope to gain some insight as to the Camino as it is post-pandemic. The present rules, the present regulations, what's it really like on the ground? Before we get into the main business of the night, however, could I ask you all, we've had a couple of lean years in the Camino Society, naturally, because there hasn't been very much activity. But now that people are coming back into normality, we'd ask you to renew your membership if you are a member. And if you're not a member, maybe you might consider joining. At €20 a year, it's a small sum. We'd also ask you to keep in touch, follow our website, because there are going to be lots of interesting events throughout the year. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over now to Johnny Rafferty.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Greetings from Spain. As you know, I live in Santiago de Compostela. I've got a confession to make. I'm not in Santiago. It's raining in Santiago, so I'm on the Costa del Sol. And I don't go back to Santiago for another few weeks, hopefully when the rain's stopped. And I want to say hello to my fellow members of the Camino Society Ireland. And I've got to tell you, soon to be my fellow countrymen, because my application for Irish citizenship is now very well advanced, and I hope to become a European and an Irish citizen very, very soon indeed. And of course, I'm speaking to you in a very auspicious year, because in 1122, 900 years ago, it was Pope Calixtus II who instituted the Holy Year. He said that when the Feast of St. James falls on a Sunday, that it would be declared a Jubilee year and there would be a holy door, and people who did the ritual of going to confession, communion, and praying for the intentions of the Pope and so forth, their time in purgatory would be remitted. And of course, in the Middle Ages, where there was this great consciousness of sin and death and the desire to get to heaven, this was hugely popular and fueled the Camino for some time. And I didn't know anything about this until the early 2000s. You know, my background for my entire working life was in the voluntary and public and health sectors. And latterly, I was doing very difficult jobs. I'll give you an example. A group of voluntary organisations came together in London, and they made a bid. There was an open competition for the £100 million that was left as part of the Millennium Fund. So this was the Millennium Legacy, and they won the competition. And then they set to, and they did battle with each other, all fighting. The trustees were all fighting because they all represented different organisations that wanted the money. And it got to the stage where the Millennium Commission were on the brink of saying, "You're not getting the money," when they approached me and asked if I would go and bang heads together and get it sorted out. And I did that. And that tended to be the kind of thing that I'd been doing for some time. And it's exhausting, you know. I'm the guy who imposes the budgets. and sacks the people and makes and we impose measurable objectives and so forth. So I found that very, very difficult. Some jobs were rewarding. In the early 2000s, I was working for the National Lottery Charities Board, giving away the money from the National Lottery to charities. It was wonderful. And one day the chairman of the board invited me to dinner. And I went to his house, big house, posh people. And he said to me, come into the drawing room whilst Jenny is in the kitchen. And so we went into the drawing room, and there on the wall was a map of what I now know to be the Camino Frances, with a red line going along it, and a photograph of Jenny, a couple of photographs with a rucksack walking along this red line. I had never heard of the Camino. I had never heard of the Camino Frances. I'd heard of St. James, but I'd absolutely no knowledge of Santiago de Compostela. During that dinner, in about 2003, I think it was, Jenny, you know what it's like, me and John Brierley, you just wind us up and we'll talk about the Camino till the cows come home. And I asked her one question about the Camino. Well, there she got started about blisters and albergues and fellowship and meeting and talking to people who don't understand you, but you do understand them and so forth. Well, the seed was planted. And that was in about 2003, I think. And over the next 4 years, you maybe identify with this, I would sit at my desk calculating how much was in my pension fund. When could I escape? I bought boots, I started walking. And of course, I spent my youth in the Scottish Hills. And this was a natural thing, but I didn't expect it to come back in my early 50s. Anyway, I'm a church organist as well, as some of you know, and I'd been going to Seville in the summers and in the winters, playing in a church there. And so I thought Seville was going to be the place that I would retire to. And then I heard about the Via de la Plata. I started planning. And so on the 2nd of January 2007, I played the organ for the Great Feast of Seville on the 1st of January, New Year's Day. And on the 2nd of January 2007, I set off from Seville to walk to Santiago. And I looked back at the house and I said, I said to myself, like Clint Eastwood, I'll be back. This is the place I'm going to go and retire to. And of course, 36 days later, I arrived in Santiago, having discovered this wonderful world of pilgrimage, fell in love with Santiago, everything changed, and my plans were in ruins. And at that point, I also had a job as chairing an NHS trust, and I was paid 2 days a week for that. Now, I knew as a chief executive that the chief executive doesn't want the chairman around if they can help it. So I said to the chief exec, if I could, I'm employed for 2 days a week. If I can work for 5 days in a row, can I have the next 3 weeks off, please? And of course she said, oh yes, chairman, off you go out of the country. And so I started coming to Santiago as often as I could. I volunteered in the Pilgrims office. I was the first volunteer writing the Compostelas. It was wonderful. One of my pals in the Pilgrims office, Danny, who's still my best friend in Santiago, said, you're coming here all this time. My partner, Raquel, and her family have an apartment which they don't use. Would you like to see it? And you can have it. So off I went, saw this beautiful apartment. It was like the Marie Celeste. The granny had died, left the apartment to the mother, Raquel's mother. Raquel's mother had renovated the apartment. Then she died, and the place was empty. So I negotiated a rent. The arrows were all pointing in the direction of Santiago. I resigned my chairmanship. I rented out my house in London, and I moved to Santiago. And I spent 6 or 7 very happy years in the Pilgrims office, writing Compostelas and greeting pilgrims. But it was very apparent to me that nobody in the cathedral spoke English. You know, and we've got all these people, 30,000 pilgrims a year, minimum in a normal year, coming from the English-speaking countries, and nobody at the Pilgrims Mass said even a hello. Everything was in Spanish. So I said to the dean of the cathedral, can we start a Mass in English, please? Because the Germans had one. And he said, where will we get priests? And I said, I'll get the priests. And then, of course, he asked the question, which every cleric, certainly Catholic clerics, asks, how much will it cost? And I said, don't you worry about that. I'll get the money. So I put an advert, I'll tell you the truth. I paid the money for an advert in the Tablet, this religious magazine for priests. I didn't think anybody would apply. The advert said, if you are a Catholic priest and you've walked the Camino and you're prepared to pay your own travel and your own subsistence, we'll give you an apartment and the privilege of ministering to pilgrims. Well, blow me. 24 priests applied, and we had Mass in 186 consecutive days that year. Joe Coughlin, Father Joe Coughlin from Cork, was one of them. He came for 5 weeks. He loved it, and we loved him. And he said, "Can I come back? Can I come back the following year, please?" And of course, we said yes. And of course, I had the same conversation again with the dean. I said, "This has been a roaring success. Can we do it again?" And he said, "Will it cost anything?" And I said, "No. Look, we've now demonstrated that this is a viable ministry." And we also had volunteers helping. And one of these volunteers was Sister Kathleen of the, what are they called? The FCJ Sisters.
Yes.
And I said to
Faithful Companions of Jesus.
Faithful Companions of Jesus. It'd be wonderful if during the season you opened a house in Santiago and then you could do this all the time. Well, of course, that came to pass. And we now have the Camino Companions as a permanent feature of life in Santiago. And it's wonderful. In the Pilgrims office also, I was the only volunteer. All of the rest of the 15 people were members of staff on contracts, many of whom didn't speak a word of English. And so I spoke to the Irish Camino Society first and got great encouragement. And then the other English-speaking associations. And they put up the money, and we rented apartments, and we brought, over 3 years, a 3-year pilot program, we brought 300 volunteers to Santiago. And they welcomed the pilgrims every day. They stood and met people, congratulated them, and showed them where to go, gave out maps of the city, and it was a wonderful experience. Now, 2 things happened. The cathedral, the dean of the cathedral saw the enormous success of the Mass in English and also the size of the collections. And he said, what we'll do is we will appoint a permanent chaplain. And Father Manny was appointed, and that's now a permanent feature of life. And of course, he then appointed a coordinator for the volunteering programs, and that's a permanent feature of life. In 2007, after that first Camino, the CSG asked me to take some old walking notes and walk the Camino Inglés and write a guidebook, which I did, and I loved doing it. John Brierley was no competition then. He hadn't cast his gaze on the Camino Inglés. So
we have to give him the right of reply now, I must say, at this.
I wrote the guide to that, and then the Camino Portugués and the Camino Finisterre and so forth. I've ended up writing 17 books. Now I'm stopping the writing at this point, but they've raised a lot of money for charity. I think about 250,000 euros have gone to pilgrim associations and other charities, but it's time to stop. Looking back, I want to share with you that I think my first Camino changed everything. It didn't change my plan. It changed it completely. It destroyed my plan. And I was led to a new way of life. I confronted a lot of issues in my life. I remember that I was walking from Seville in January on the great Meseta, walking day after day after day, waving to shepherds, hoping somebody would wave back to me. And of course, it was a time of very profound reflection. I want to say to you, sometimes this is difficult to talk about. I think the biggest change is in my faith. I'm a Christian. And whilst I'm an organist and I'm at Mass more often than most priests, I've always thought of myself as a very bad Catholic and not a very good Christian. But the Camino showed me through the fellowship of other pilgrims, the kindness of the Spanish people, and the very wide network of friends, that Christ's simple message of love one another is alive and well, and it's alive on the Camino. It's in the people, not in the church, buildings, or institutions. Moving towards the end of this discourse, the pandemic has tested all of us, no more so than the Camino. I walked from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in October 2020, from Saint-Jean to Santiago. I joined some 50,000, mostly Spanish people and a few Italians. All precautions were in place. But because there were few pilgrims, many places were closed. And of course, the big question at that time was, would they open again? Last year saw the beginning of the revival of the Camino, and a further 50,000 pilgrims walked to Santiago, meaning, we need to remember that means many, many more, maybe 10 times more, had walked the Camino for a week at a time, a weekend at a time, and didn't arrive in Santiago. This year, with the infection rates significantly reducing, every day they go down. And I've got to tell you the latest statistics. 91% of the target population of over 12-year-olds in Santiago have been doubly vaccinated. So I think, here's my prediction, that we're heading for a bumper year on the Camino. Today, this very day, the 15th, 54 pilgrims received the Compostela, bringing the total in the first 6 weeks of 2022 to 2,331. Will that magnify to 400,000? Will it magnify to 500,000? We will see full albergues again. Some of the albergues are still operating at 50% capacity for unvaccinated people. In Galicia, if you're vaccinated and you show your vaccination certificate, the albergues can operate at 100%. So that's me. With that, I want to now introduce my very good friend and author, John Brierley. We meet with considerable frequency on Zoom meetings. I first interviewed John for an article in 2010, then again in 2019, then again in 2021. During the pandemic, we've both been busy supporting pilgrims with countless Zoom meetings. And this evening, it's a pleasure to be with you again, John. You're a highly successful guide writer, but more than that, and I hope I'm not breaking any confidences, John's guidebooks are a great commercial success. There's no doubt about that. But as I go around the Camino, I go into an albergue and they say, with a hole in the roof, and John Brierley helped us repair the hole in the roof. And so he shares his success in the spirit of the Camino. Over to you, John.
Well, that's a lovely, it's lovely to be here with you all. I mean, the great thing about the Camino is this great sense of family, and I really feel it. And I think it's nearly everybody who would write to me saying that one of the great things they bring back from the Camino is this sense of genuine family. I mean, sacred family. We're all in this at a very deep level. We're all searching for something. We've all got a commonality, and the comradeship and confraternity is very beautiful. And, this evening is part of that. I hadn't realized that I was going to be asked to give quite such a resume of my own, how I came across it, but obviously that's part of what this evening is about. So I'll say that I was a reasonably successful businessman in Ireland. I started my own surveying practice. I worked with Lisney's and eventually joined up with Jackson Stopps. And that gave me, I never quite sure why on earth I was in this line of work. I was supposedly very, successful in the sense I had 2.4 children, which apparently is the ideal number. 2 is quite right and 3 is too many or something. But we hadn't quite got our third child. We had the house and the car and the sort of all the trappings of success, and my life was incredibly empty. It was like it was utterly depressing. And in my 39th year, I got a recurring daydream. I mean, it would come at, I'd be on a Zoom call. Well, there weren't Zoom calls then, but I would be at a meeting or talking to somebody, and this dream would come. And it was exactly the same dream. And I couldn't see at that stage. It took a whole year of exactly the same dream, constantly, day in, day out. And in the dream, I'm very old. I'm in a wheelchair. My life's over. And I'm handed a plastic clock a plastic alarm clock. I don't like plastic. And it's put on my lap because I have no movement in my arms. And I look down at the clock and I realize that the value of my life is measured in this plastic clock. And the tears begin both in the dream and in myself as I realized that my life was going nowhere. And at the end of that year, I was essentially having an existential crisis. Who was I? Why was I here? What was the purpose of my life? And that inspired me to take a year off from work, to explore life and who I was. My family were delighted. I mean, a lot of people who get to that stage, they leave their family behind or the family leave them behind. And my children and my wife thought, this is great. We're off for a year while Dad discovers himself. And they thought this was a great idea, a year out from school. And anyway, we sort of were traveling around in a camper van and ended up in a place called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, with sort of the odd person going with a rucksack up the hill. And so we went up the hill after them, not walking, mind you, in the old camper van. And that was my sort of first, and that was way back in 1987, when I sort of, if you like, first discovered the Camino. At the end of that year, I realized that I was never going back to the old self, because blinkers had come off and I had discovered a new me and a much more joyous self. And then I walked the Camino for the first time in the early 90s with a friend who had a different motivation to me. And luckily, when I reached Logroño, he was a sort of an Irish sportsman, and I was trying to keep up with him, the classic, trying to keep up with a mate. And when I reached Logroño, I discovered that Logroño has a very large, one of the largest foot hospitals in that part of Spain. And I was in a lot of pain, and I went in and I was just on the verge of a stress fracture. So the hospital said, well, if you've got to go home. However, if you stay under our supervision for a week, we'll see if we can, get you fit enough to go slowly on. And that, of course, broke this. My mate had to go on, and I was now on my own. And that journey deepened as I was walking slowly. And some weeks later, I arrived at a place where everything changed for me. I mean, I literally had an altered state. I mean, I was completely out of it. I'd never experienced anything like this before. I knew something profound was happening. And I went into silence. I hung a little note around my neck saying, in my worst possible Spanish, which is marginally better now, but very bad then, something like Camino en paz, en silencio, or that sort of thing, so that if anybody accosted me, I could sort of point to it and say, and of course, people on the Camino, one of the lovely things is they're very respectful of, people who are needing time or whatever. So it was a big experience happening that sort of, and when I arrived in Ocebrero, this state I was in was still there, and just something seemed to happen to me. And these sort of ideas came that I was to write guidebooks. It didn't make any sense to me. In Spain, what am I? I'd never written guidebooks, all that sort of thing. But it deepened as I walked, and I realized that, yes, this was something that I was, supposed to do. So I started it. It didn't make any sense initially. Luckily, I was living in a spiritual community at the time called the Findhorn Foundation in the north of Scotland. And they had we had a publishing company there. And because they were so very altruistic and wanted to sort of publish things of a spiritual significance, so, they weren't so, I've never got a commercial publisher, because at that stage, well, they asked me, well, how many people walk? Well, I said, well, I don't, not all that many. I mean, back then there were probably only, 20,000 or so, and probably only 10% of them were English speaking. But anyway, they supported the idea. And then that's when I realized my surveying practice came in, because, of course, I loved maps and map drawing, and I knew how to make maps. And I realized that most of the people who walk the Camino are not hikers per se. They don't necessarily know how to read a map, which way to turn it up and so on and so forth. So I sort of developed something for people who are not familiar with maps, and it seems to work for people. There's like the TomTom. You go down the route, down the thing, and on the left-hand side, you'll pass a pub, and on the right-hand side, you'll pass an albergue, and that sort of helped people, find their way along easily, and they didn't have to look at scales because I put it on it. This is 3 miles, 3K, this is 2, whatever, whatnot. So people seem to like that idea, but the most important thing that I got during this sort of time, this induction time, was that these books were to be written with equal respect to both the outer journey and the inner journey, and they had to be dedicated to both. We walk an outward path, and we have to prepare for that, and have the right boots and the right equipment, and know where we can stop and what the costs are going to be. But also, and crucially, what makes the Camino so special, it is a pilgrimage route. That means it is essentially a place of spiritual journey and discovering. That's what makes it what it is, what makes it so special. And I believe it's what makes it so incredibly powerful and efficacious in a world that is absolutely going mad. I mean, consensus reality at the moment is absolutely mad. We have to shift and change. And that shift and change, I don't believe the Camino is there to direct it in terms of tweaking the outside. We have to find a new consciousness. We have to find a new way to relate to each other, one that's built on respect, essentially on love. We've got to find loving kindness within ourselves towards each other, towards nature. And we don't have that at the moment. But the Camino offers us a place where everybody there has a commonality, even if it's not, people aren't on an overtly spiritual route. That's what they're on. And something nearly always happens along that route. In my experience, something very profound happened. And it shifted and completely changed my life, so that I sort of wrote back to Ireland and said, well, that's it. I'm not coming back. I have a new direction. Thank you very much. It was great knowing you. But now I have another purpose and function. No, it's not so much dramatic for other people. Of course, in that sense, too, I was also giving up my livelihood. I had no other means of income. And certainly these Camino guides, it was never, my publisher said, never expect to, take anything away from these. This is a gift that you're offering, and royalty rates, it wasn't going to put food on my table. So I went through a period of, a real dark night. How am I going to support myself and my family? Well, if I think that we find something that we're truly passionate about, then something happens. That sort of passion seems to provide a way of, living, if we make the change and we make it for the right reasons. And so these guidebooks began to come out with this sense of, not only do we need to prepare for the outer journey, but we also need to prepare for the inner journey. And if we do, then I believe that journey that we make becomes ever more efficacious. It becomes ever more worthy of the name of a pilgrimage. It becomes transformative. And, there are many sources to help us prepare for that inner journey. And I do believe, John just mentioned it earlier today about, how the Camino is going to sort of pan out from the post-COVID period. Well, certainly what I'm experiencing, the people who are writing to me, I believe there's a huge pent-up demand now. People have been deprived of an opportunity to go on this route. And in that period of 2 years, something dramatic has happened for the world. We're not going back to the way things were. We can't, and we won't. And people's lives have changed dramatically. Lots of people have had loved ones die. Other people have lost their jobs. There's been major changes in people's lives. And now people are really beginning to ask those big, deep existential questions. What's it all about? Why am I here? It doesn't last for very long. We're in these bodies for a very short space of time. So what do we want to do with the time that we have? And I think more and more people are really beginning to ask those deep questions. And we need to collectively We need a shift in consciousness. And it might sound grandiose, but it's necessary. And the Camino, there's no greater vehicle on earth to assist towards that shift and change, I believe, than the Camino. I mean, we know we come from different traditions. In Ireland, like Spain before, Spain a generation ago was 95% practicing Roman Catholic. Today, it's nearer 10%. And it's, a secular society. So traditionally, people fell back to the religion that they were brought up with. But, the pews are, the church, people are looking for a personal spiritual experience that many people are not getting in the church that they were brought up with. And the Camino, I believe, fills a gap because we're all searching, but many of us are searching. And I've met people on the Camino. I probably met, John said he took 37 days to walk up from Sevilla to Santiago. Well, it took me 40. Well, I was only a few days behind him. But when I arrived in Santiago, I realized that I had been on the route for exactly 40 days and 40 nights. There is something about a block of time that when we give it up for change, when we sort of invoke shift or change in our lives, and we give that space, and we find a place like the Camino, which is dedicated to very high purposes, then some magic happens. And I've met many atheists and agnostics along the Camino. I've met people on the route up from Sevilla. I only met one other pilgrim, a Japanese Shinto priest. So I've met people from every religion, but mostly from none. But everybody in their own way has been seeking. They've been searching for some deeper truth. And that's, I believe, is why the Camino is so important today, because it welcomes everybody from every religion and none. It welcomes everybody from every color, from every part of society, from every part of the world. I mean, John will know, how many people, I think, I've never seen the statistics, which have said that not less than 170 nations are represented every year on the Camino. Well, there's only 208. The whole world is represented on the Camino. So I just love what the Camino offers the world as a place for personal and planetary transformation.
Thank you. Can I ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind?
Delighted.
Now, you mentioned earlier a lot of pilgrims write to you. Can you tell us what their anxieties are? What are the common anxieties that pilgrims write to you about?
They're usually couched, I've got, my wife is a psychotherapist, so sometimes I ask her to help read through what somebody's trying to say. It depends. If people haven't been on the Camino, they're usually sort of quite reticent to come out fully with what's on their mind, because they're not sure what it's about or who they're talking to or that sort of thing. But there is an unease. The commonality would be an unease in people's lives. They feel something isn't quite right. There's a sense that they're not fulfilling their potential, and they're looking for some greater meaning behind their daily life, whatever that is. Now,
Sorry, John. I agree with you. I get the sense from the emails that I get that people write to say that they're frightened they'll get lost, or they're frightened that they won't meet friends and so forth. And often I sense it's fear, but I suspect it's not fear of getting lost. It's a more deeply rooted anxiety in their lives, and that's why they're drawn to the Camino, as I was.
Yes, I would like to think so, John. I would really like to think that's the case, because I believe that in order for us to make any shift or change, funny enough, I believe the first thing that needs to happen is we need to admit that we're lost. If we feel if I feel I know where I am and where I'm going, well, what is it to change? I know. So I think the first thing I know that happened in my life, I had to come to a place that I know nothing. I just know that I'm not content. I know my life isn't going the way it should. I know I'm not fulfilling my purpose or function here. I know haven't fulfilled my potential. I had to admit I do not know. Now, that you could say is fear-based, but it's the right sort of fear. That it moves us towards making a shift and a change. No, I've never really had people ask for a practice. I had one pilgrim phone me. I don't know whether she got my phone number. She was lost on the Portuguese route. She said, "I'm lost, John. I'm lost. What do I do?" I said, "No." The first thing I said is breathe. I said, I can't hear you. Breathe slowly and deeply. And she did that. She was panicking a bit. And I said, "Now," I said, "the next thing is keep where you are, stay still. And before you know where you are, you will find another pilgrim coming your way." And before I'd finished what I was saying, she, I see Martha coming. I'm okay. Bye. And put the phone down.
John, a question I've been dying to ask you for a very long time, because you and I are, we're no longer spring chickens, if I may say that.
No.
Although you're a bit older than me, but you've definitely got more hair than me. But I suffer very badly from blisters if I'm not careful. You know, all the mystical stuff, we'll come back to that. What physical problems have you encountered walking the Camino, and how do you deal with them?
I don't think I've ever had a physical. I beg your pardon. I had a physical problem the first Camino I did, where I nearly broke my foot because I tried to keep up with a mate. Now that was a very good lesson, because I never ever did that again.
Absolutely.
No. So that was one injury. The only other injury I had, and don't forget, I spend the bones of 6 months every year on the Camino. When I walk, I'm spring and autumn. I'm walking the Caminos wherever.
I saw you in a taxi once.
I'm sure you see me in buses. I go backwards and forwards. See, don't forget.
Of course, as you've got to do.
Well, it's a lot of people, go from, if you go to, in any of the routes, there are often 3 or 4, and I love the alternative routes. Mm. So when I arrive somewhere, I've now got to get back the next day and start again on another route.
Now, John, I want an honest answer. Do you follow the Brierley stages?
The what?
The Brierley stages that everyone talks about.
Oh God, no!
No. But the point I want to make to you is that Alison Raju, another great guide writer, was deeply opposed to the way you write guides.
Oh, she was deeply opposed.
Set stages.
But I knew her well, and I said, believe me, I said, I have the only bit that's ever in black surrounded by red is right up front. I said, I've only got a page to put a map in, and there has to be a start point and the end point to all this. And there's no point in putting an end point where there's no accommodation, or there's only accommodation for 8 people. So everybody, the normal is 25K. So I got to divide up, like everybody does, 25K and put it on one page. And I say to everybody, please do not in any way take this as what you should be doing. Do less, do more, do alternative routes. Please do not take this in any way as what you should be doing. You should be working out, finding out what your body needs to walk. Does it need to do 15 a day or 10 or 40? But please do not take these start and end points as anyway as what I'm recommending. I don't. Full stop. And however I try and emphasize it, people will always say that. But what else can you do? You have to have a start and an end point. So to put on a page, and then you say to people, find your own. And I always say, in the recent ones, the last 10 years, I've been saying, if you want quieter space, find the interim spots. If you're on a sort of a more contemplative journey, find some of the interim villages, because they're usually much quieter and so forth. So we will never resolve that one. And Alison Raju, I think Alison is wonderful. But Alison once told me, she gave me a very strict talking to. She said, "Why on earth are you writing about St. James coming to Santiago alive? He came there dead." And I said, "For heaven's sake, Alison, the whole point and purpose of this is that James came here with a message alive. He was hopelessly unsuccessful in delivering it, but that didn't change the point. The point is he came here as one of Christ's disciples to preach his message of unconditional love. He came alive to teach and to preach a message from his master. And I could never get over this thing that James came here dead. Of course, he came back later, but his message came to Galicia, came to the Iberian Peninsula as a disciple, as a preacher. Anyway, what's wonderful about the Camino is we all have different perspectives. And what I particularly love, and I know there's a lot of historians out there, I love that so much of the Camino is legendary. So you can interpret legends whichever way you want. I've never been particularly keen on the sort of dramatic, literal approach to anything. I'm not really particularly interested in history, but I do love the fact that, there is a legend that St. James came to the Iberian Peninsula and his body came back by his disciples some years later. But it's rather gone off the point about the stages. I hope we've dealt with the stages. Please, nobody take Johnnie Walker's or Alison Raju's or John Brierley's or anybody's suggestion that you have to walk from here to here. That would be crazy.
John, you and I have corresponded and spoken, and I've written quite a bit about the changes which have taken place in my life from walking the Camino and the way in which, in fact, I hope this is not a sacrilege. I think the film The Way does not expose the tremendous power of personal conversion, personal change, which the Camino can bring about. And I've written a lot about that, and you speak a lot about it. And I do believe that it can change individuals. But I'm not sure I would go so far as to say that it will bring about a paradigm change. I mean, John, only 500,000 people a year tops walk the Camino. How can that bring about change in a capitalist society, which Jesus has been trying to change for 2,000 years and is still in some difficulty?
Well, okay, so here's some response. Part of the power, I believe, of the Camino is when you talk about, 300, 400, 500,000 people or whatever, that's fine. But what staggered me when I went around, when I toured Canada a couple of years ago and Australia, I would be brought up to funny little villages up in the back, and hundreds of people would pack these halls who'd never been on the Camino, but had heard about it and were interested in exploring it, the idea behind it. So behind all those who make it with the Compostela are hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of people who are affected by it and influenced by it and interested by it and who read about it and have these groups and discussions. Relatively few proportion of people have actually walked it, but most people come because they want to listen to people, who want to listen to the experience, and maybe they have a plan to walk it in the future, something like that. But there are many, many more people. And part of the outlet on this is, I believe, because I mentioned it earlier rather nervously, but the conventional way we were brought up and the religious faith we were brought up in, I'm talking about the world in general, not just, Europe, either Protestant England or Roman Catholic Spain, but collectively from many different traditions. I mean, I was fascinated to learn that there are over 45,000 different denominations and sects of Christianity. I mean, and it's increasing. But at the same time, there is, I understand, less and less people actually coming in to church as a regular practice.
No, John, come on. As many people still go to church as go to football matches. Churches are not dead. Religion is not dead.
No, but I think, let me try and explain to this matter. What I'm saying is that there is a hunger beyond just the Celtic and Catholic and Christian traditions of pilgrimage. There's a great hunger out in the world today, and people are looking for a way to fulfill it and a way to search, to seek. And the Camino is offering them a place where there is no expectation that they would come from any particular tradition. Everybody is welcome on the Camino, and there's very few places. In fact, there's no pilgrim route that I know on the world that is eclectic like that. I mean, we know, you go to Fatima. I mean, I would say virtually everybody is a practicing Roman Catholic. It's virtually exclusive that way. If you go to the Kumbh, they're all Hindus. If you go to, so the Camino is unique in the world because it is the only overtly pilgrimage route that I know that welcomes everybody. And I think that's terribly powerful because it speaks, if you like, of a human brotherhood, sisterhood.
John, you speak very, very evangelically about your belief that walking the Camino can change the world.
And what I'm saying,
they said about John the Baptist that he was the voice that cries in the wilderness. Are you the John the Baptist of the Camino?
John, what I'm saying is
that's a compliment, by the way.
What I'm saying, because of what I believe, is what I experience and what people have told me, that the people who walk the Camino have overwhelmingly some sort of shift and change in their perspective on life and their purpose and meaning in life. For my sins, thinking that I could provide some sort of a support for a television program of famous people walking the Camino, which was predominantly quite a militant atheistic group, production group, and over half the participants were atheists. But when they all reached to the end, to Finisterre, they were all, the majority, there weren't many of them, but 4 out of the 7 were, very determined atheists. When they reached the end of the journey, they all admitted that something had changed. Now, okay, that's a sample of 7 people, but I saw their journey and I saw them shift and change. They weren't, as very few of us are, really to articulate well what the shift and change was. They all mentioned something around a sense of community, sort of a commonality, a sort of a brotherhood, sisterhood. But change they had agreed had happened. So what I'm saying is, change the world. You change the world. We change the world by changing ourselves. And the Camino, I'm an individual, you're an individual. The Camino is potentially 500,000 people, coming. I mean, don't forget, many come that they don't walk. So you're probably talking about maybe millions who come to the holy city to go into the cathedral, and so forth. So there is a process of expansion from the Camino because of the numbers. And as I say, I was amazed when I went to, particularly to Australia, to find so many people there who'd never walked. So I suddenly realized the number, 10,000 a year used to come over from Australia, something like that every year. But there were tens of thousands more who'd never come over, but who were interested in the Camino and came to these groups and discussions. So no, I think this is, tell me, John, any other organization that you know of in the world today that is literally covers the world? The United Nations doesn't.
Well, the Catholic Church makes not a bad job of covering the world.
I agree. And there's
the World Methodist Fellowship would cover a huge part of the world as well.
Sure.
And there are many organisations. The Boy Scouts cover the world. The Girl Guides cover the world.
But aren't we? But have we?
I wonder, John,
I
wonder if you're ascribing qualities to the Camino, which are really an exaggeration of the facts.
Okay, all right. Well, I can accept that. Perhaps. I mean, I've never really thought of it in those terms, but I think that all the organisations that you name, I mean, I wouldn't dream of it because it's not even my awareness to suggest that the Camino is the only vehicle that is part of the shift and the change. Good heavens! I mean, all these there's a wonderful book called The Blessed Unrest, which lists something like 87,000 different organizations around the world who are making profound change in the way we see ourselves, see our position in nature and in the environment. I mean, it is huge. It is massive. I'm simply saying that the Camino is an important part of that.
No, John, you're a very thoughtful man. I've known you for a long time, and your sincerity is palpable, and you're a great advocate for the Camino, and that's why you're much loved. Now, one of the things that people are concerned about is looking to the next year. As we can we calculate the effects of COVID? People are still saying lots of albergues have closed. That doesn't seem to me to be the case. The Camino infrastructure, as far as I can tell, now you're in a better position than me because you collect all the data. It seems to me that the Camino infrastructure, certainly the Camino Francés, the Camino Portugués, the Camino Inglés, the main Camino routes, the infrastructure is still intact. Families owned the buildings that they turned into albergues. And if they didn't borrow too much money, they could survive no customers for a couple of years. Is that what you think?
Well, you have walked it. I didn't walk it last year. I mean, I went on parts, but I didn't do any, research. But you actually walked it last year, so you had an experience of that late last year. But the main issue with the albergues, the people who write to me, is that they still have in force these. Distance rules, so that an albergue that had 12 beds is now reduced to 8. An albergue that 24 beds is now only allowed to have 12, and they are being.
Well, just to be clear on that, John, because I was checking on this today, actually, and it applies in different regions, but in Galicia, where there are 70 municipal albergues, as you know, if pilgrims are doubly vaccinated and I've got the certificate, the albergue can operate at 100% capacity.
Do you know when that ruling came in?
Oh, I think it's been there for a wee while. Yeah, okay. I can find that for you. But those who are admitting pilgrims who are not vaccinated, it's different. It's different in Castilla Leon. It's different than in other parts of the country. At the moment, I suppose it's not an issue because there aren't enough pilgrims to fill up the albergues anyway.
Correct.
So we shall see.
Correct.
But it seems to me the Camino has survived and will grow in strength and go from strength to strength again.
Oh, I've no doubt. I mean, nobody can predict what's happening next week, let alone next month. I mean, the rules and the regulations are changing constantly. So, I'm over here in the Lake District when I'm flying over to Dublin on Monday, and Aer Lingus said to me, well, now you'll have to check with the Irish Embassy because we know the rules are changed. Check the day before you fly because things might have changed. But having said that, I mean, inevitably things are relaxing fast, and I would imagine by the time the main numbers begin to start heading into the Camino in the next couple of months, the rules and regulations will, one would imagine or speculate, would be virtually back to normality.
It's very interesting, on Thursday, I can't remember what day it is, Thursday last or Saturday last, they removed the rule that we had in Spain, we had to wear masks outside of our houses. And they said, you don't need to do that anymore. Well, I don't know. I was looking around today and I reckon 40-50% of people are still wearing masks. And of course, you've got to put it on when you go into a shop And then the sales assistant has no idea what I'm saying to them because my Spanish accent's so bad and I'm wearing a mask. Anyway, things are relaxing. There's no doubt about that. And I think the significant thing is that the infection rate is plummeting in Spain. And I think only 16% of hospital beds nationally are occupied by people suffering from COVID. Which is an incredible statistic, and that it will just keep getting better.
Yes, I think so. But I mean, but also what's complicating it a bit is the national rules. And I mean, in the English-speaking countries like America, Canada, Australia, they also have their rules about who can fly and so on and so forth. So it's still a little bit complicated, but I do believe that within a few months things will ease out. And of course, the other reality is an economic reality. I mean, these hostels and albergues and the hotels are there's a reality now that they've got to try and get the pilgrim dollar in, and they're going to be making whatever they need to do to be open to welcome the pilgrims as they hit the Camino. So I think that the Camino will provide, as it always has done, and I think it will meet the challenge of coping with what we both feel and expect and hope will be an increase in the pilgrim numbers from certainly up to what they were in 2019.
I was in a hostel in Hornelius on the Camino Frances, and I said to the guy, what's it been like? And he said, Caballero, we don't have a word, no tenemos una palabra. Take the word catastrophe, add it to the word calamity, and multiply by 100, and it will not be able to describe the scale of the disaster in hostels and hotels and restaurants. And he said to me, the banks are being very sympathetic, and the government is being very sympathetic, but debt is debt, and it will have to be repaid at some point. And so my reckoning is the sooner pilgrims are back on the Camino, the better. And the sooner tourists are back in Santiago, the better. And we saw some of that last year. In August, you couldn't get a bed in Santiago, even in the midst of all of this, because of course it was the Spaniards, John, exactly as you've described. They were desperate to get out. Desperate to get away, desperate to have a day trip or a weekend trip to Santiago. And I'm sure that's the case for many, many. We sense that on the Pilgrim forums and on Facebook. People are the excitement is mounting. When can I buy my plane tickets? When can I get to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port? When's your next Camino, John?
Well, I was hoping, to go out in April, but there's issues coming up for me at the moment, so I might have to delay that. But that was, that's a time I like to get out March. Usually St. Patrick's Day is my wake-up call to, it's time to start moving.
Now, will you be in Santiago on St. Patrick's Day?
No, I won't. No. I was hoping that's usually when I start.
Because I know you're like me, John. You don't drink during Lent. But St. Patrick's Day is a very special day. We have a dispensation, I believe, from the Pope, no less.
Oh dear. Yeah. So
when will I see you in Santiago again, John?
Well, hopefully sometime this year. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. I look forward to that.
And looking back on all of your Caminos, is there a friend of mine is walking the Via de la Plata at the moment, and as he was describing the stage going into Carnaval, and I remember reading, I read in Alison Raju's book, as you reach the crest of the Kill, you will be able to see wildflowers as far as the eye can see. And of course, I got up the hill and there was so much fog I couldn't see my finger in front of me. Anyway, I'll tell you the truth. I went back the following year and I went up the hill. I walked for a few days and I went up the hill in the spring, and Alison was right. Now, if I ever in my life doubted that there was a God and there's a creative force in the universe, it was this wondrous sight of wildflowers of every colour as far as the eye could see. And that memory just It's still very vivid to me. You must have countless things like that, John.
Well, it's not. I'll honestly say that when I step foot wherever it is, whether it's starting in France or Portugal or or in further afield in Hungary. I started off from Budapest. I did the first part of that journey. There's always this heightened sense of well-being, of excitement, and I really mean that. On any Camino, I just said, oh, wow, there's something familiar that dawns, something uplifting, something special. It's innovating. So to say anything special, I really sort of mean it. They're all special, including those days when the weather's terrible and you're soaked and you suddenly come into some little place that's in a little, basic hostel and suddenly you dry out and life just seems so perfect and blissful and beautiful. I have to say, I have a particular, I do love the Portuguese and the Portuguese roots. They're still, they're becoming popular, but there's so many variations there that you can still find, quiet and special. As I have a great love of Portugal and the Portuguese roots, but it's not to say that I don't love them all, because I do.
So, John, imagine that we get a message from St. Peter to say, you've got one Camino left. And you've only got one place you can visit on that Camino. Yeah. What would it be for you?
Well, I would probably, if it was only one and I had a short time, it would probably be along the Celtic Camino. There's a great sense of familiarity. I know it is from home, where I spent most of my life. And so, the sea and the sort of the basicness of that part of Galicia, the sort of rawness, untainted, untamed. That and Finisterre, I've got a big place in my heart.
For me, I think, John, I've thought about this. It would have to be my table in the restaurant San Clemente, eating a mountain of seafood and sending text messages to St. Peter saying, you'll have to wait till I'm finished. Now, whether I would get away with that or not, I don't know. But it's one of my most favourite places in the entire world. So, and I hope to see everybody there. And I hope to see you there, John Brierley, sometime later this year.
Well, indeed. And, Mariscos in Galicia, you can't get it finer. There's no finer place in the world. And so, a plate full of zambarinas or something like that I won't be long getting out. I love the food of Galicia too. And I love the wines of Galicia. I love the Albarino. There's no part of Galicia that I don't warm to, although it's usually very cold.
Absolutely. Very like Ireland and very like Scotland.
Well, guys, thanks a million. That was just a fantastic few minutes. It seems like only a few minutes, but I know it's longer than that. I really appreciate what you've put into it. Knowing you both, I've no doubt that you could have turned your own individual stories into another book. And thank you for sharing it with us. It was very personal and it was very profound. My final words to all of the listeners, don't forget, check us out, maybe join the society. And to you guys, thank you so much for giving your time and for sharing your stories so personal and so moving. Thank you.